Welcome to the Establish the Edge podcast. I'm Mike Leone, back with Ben Gretch of bengretch.substack.com and of the Stealing Bananas podcast with Sean Siegel to record episode 6 of our offseason projection special. We've got the NFC North on tap. It's a really fun division to talk through. I feel like there's more to talk through for like most of these teams this year than there was last year. A lot of coaching turnovers and interesting personnel stuff. And we'll start with Green Bay. The play calling stuff is a little bit more straightforward with them, with having the same quarterback play caller there. We've each got them a bit below average in plays run per game at just under 63 and right around league average in terms of pass rate, a little bit over 60%. So we're pretty much in lockstep there, and that results in pretty similar Jordan Love lines, around 4,300 yards for each of us. Ben's a little hotter on passing touchdowns at 31.4. We're at 28.1. But at the end of the day, 324 fantasy points for Gretch, 311 for us. Very similar lines on Jordan Love.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know that my pass TD rate accurately reflects my confidence that Love is like that dude, but he had a really high TD rate last year, and the market has a high expectation for touchdowns on him. So, this is where my projection comes out, I guess. He looks solid relative to market expectations and all of that. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
He's also one of the rare quarterbacks that goes in that range where there's a lot of his pass catchers go after him, which is interesting. You can make that work in some drafts a little bit easier than some other guys, comparing him to like Burrow, for example. We just did the AFC North, and you've got Chase and Higgins off the board, and there's not a ton there if you don't have one of those guys. With Love, the only guy that's gone is Jaden Reed, and you've still got a few guys in Wicks, Dobbs, the tight ends that go later.
Yeah, he's easy to play. The one note I would make on him, as far as like I was just kind of alluding to not being like totally sold, is just like I think a lot of the case for Love being that dude, as I just called him, is what he did in the second half of the year, and he was incredible. Like down the stretch, final 8 games, 18 touchdowns, 1 interception, and then went and absolutely torched the Dallas secondary for 272 and 3 TDs on 21 passes. They were just so efficient in that first game. And then they were in line to beat the 49ers before he threw a couple second half interceptions. I do worry a little bit. Like, I think Matt LaFleur's a really good coach. I do worry a little bit that like he was elevating some of this schematically, and whether Love can sort of take that next step and elevate the offense as teams start to then have counter punches to what they were doing effectively. But that second half, like those numbers argue for a high pass TD rate and that kind of stuff. The first half, a little bit more concerning. So how much weight are you going to put in those final 8 games?
Yeah, and going to the backfield, I do like both members of this backfield at cost. No surprise, I'm in on Josh Jacobs, but and again, this is format dependent, I should say. The people that draft on underdog really don't like Josh Jacobs, so you're talking, pretty consistently in the 5th round there, as opposed to, FFPC, he's going at the 3-4 turn. So very, very different in terms of cost there. I know there's been some concern over Jacobs, people looking at LaFleur's, running back allocation historically, and being somewhat concerned that Jacobs is going to be in a committee here. I think he's going to be maybe not full workhorse, but like the clear one here. And it seems like you've got it projected that way too. We're both right around 233 rushing attempts, target totals in the mid 50s for Josh Jacobs, which puts him at about 200 half PPR fantasy points for our projection. So this is someone too that I've talked about with, I'm trying to not, I think the market a little bit has overreacted to some of his rushing metrics from last year. It was a little bit of a disaster season for the Raiders. It's not a good thing, but I don't think it's something that's easy to point to. And I think as a result, that's part of the reason why there's like maybe, some bad vibes with Jacobs from the drafting community.
Yeah, he's definitely someone I could see. I'm not taking very much of him, and I could see being wrong on. We did an exercise at Ship Chasing a few weeks ago of like the guys that we're not taking a lot of that we could be wrong on, and I named him as one of my 5 players. So like that's just a range where I'm not taking a lot of running backs for the way that I'm building, because I'm really into the elite tight end builds and kind of avoiding the running backs in that range. But I don't love it because I think the projection is solid, and I do think he could be solid. Marshawn Lloyd didn't catch a lot of passes in college. I think it's very comfortable to project Jacobs to handle most of the passing downs when his secondary running back is a rookie, and they brought him in to be kind of the guy. We know teams like the veterans of pass pro and that kind of stuff. When you pay a guy like this, you're like, he's the guy that does the little things for us. So he probably gets the goal line. He probably gets a little bit extra work in pass pro, meaning a little bit extra targets and a little bit of extra consistency with his receiving workload. Lloyd is this like explosive player. A lot of missed tackles forced per touch in college. Didn't ever have like huge workloads. Did have to transfer and was a little better as a runner once he came over to USC. I think from the other USC, from South Carolina to Southern California. I do worry a little bit that some of his efficiency metrics are kind of maybe boosted by the fact that he was playing with Caleb Williams in an offense where defenses were probably sitting back and a few different DBs in college. But he's, seems like an explosive back. The key to him, and I'm taking a lot of him, even though I'm a little worried about his profile, is that the team is talking about using him, as a standalone value guy. He seems like that clear, like standalone value plus contingent upside play in a good offense play that is like where he's priced. I just love it. I mean, like Zach Charbonnet is another example of a similar type of play, and he goes a little higher. I think I would prefer Lloyd straight up just because there's a little more maybe talent uncertainty like to the ceiling. He's a nice price in the double-digit rounds. What you get out of him from a running back, you could plug and play him probably. And then I think if Jacobs does miss time, AJ Dillon's back, but they were letting AJ Dillon walk. They re-signed him cheaply late in the offseason when no one else wanted AJ Dillon. Is sort of the way that I thought of, that timeline.
Yeah. I like Lloyd. He's one of the rookie running backs, outside of like the ones that went very early, that I have pretty clear confidence in his pecking order on the depth chart, even with AJ Dillon coming back. It just hasn't worked out for Dillon, and it doesn't really seem like there's much reason for that to change. And the way they've talked about Lloyd, like you said, it does sound like they're intent on using him right away. Receivers, where things get really interesting because this team really spreads the ball around. They also had guys in and out due to injury, particularly Christian Watson, which can make them difficult to figure out. We both have Jayden Reed leading the team in targets, but very different target projections for Jayden Reed. I'm at 91, you're at 119, and that's obviously, a big discrepancy, basically the difference between him being a good pick or bad pick where he goes in drafts. So yeah, curious how you're seeing this shaking out for Reed.
Yeah, it's a good point that there's a gap there. I do think I could easily see him be at 91, and like obviously 119 is not like a massive number for a wide receiver one. So I mean, like even for my projection, like in my notes, I wrote this is a better and best ball group, right? Like that's what it feels like to me. You're going to get spike games from throughout the group. If you're building a Jordan Love team in best ball, you can stack him 3 different ways because, some weeks one guy pops off, another guy pops off a different week. I think it's going to be a lot harder and managed. I have concerns about Reed, even though I have him at the clear, stronger projection than you. He did have the strongest volume, role last year, and I think he has a clear volume floor, the strongest volume floor of this group because of his role. They're doing like the jet motion tip passes to him and stuff. Like that's part of where I give him some extra touches. And I think just the slot roll, the underneath stuff, I think the other receivers overlap more. And so, a little bit like I it's a floor bet on the targets for Reed. And yet when you factor in air yards, like Christian Watson actually had a slightly higher weighted targets per route run. That stat I reference from time to time that brings in some air yards. Dobbs, Wicks, Luke Musgrave all factor in. It's really tough to get the target shares right.
Yeah. And the difficulty we've had is like with Reed in particular is like looking at some of the 2 and 3 wide receiver set data. And I'm trying to make sure I get this right, but we had Green Bay in 3 wide receivers or more, 62% of plays. So a little bit below league average. And Jayden Reed in the games that Christian Watson played, 9 games that Christian Watson played, only played in the 2 wide receiver sets 3% of the time.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
where I struggle with his price with that type of usage. And it seems like they have carved out roles where even if there was an injury, I don't know if that elevates Reed to usage in 2 wide receiver sets. That might go to someone else. That might go to Wicks. That might go to Melton and not Reed, even though we'd like it to go to Reed. So, but it's definitely difficult. And then the Watson stuff's difficult too, Ben, in terms of I think the injury prone stuff for most players is overrated. With Watson, I don't know. He's been in and out so much. I don't know how that is. It's difficult for us to evaluate him with this offense taking a huge step forward and him being in and out. And in the playoff games, they weren't playing him a ton. Whether that's because he wasn't fully healthy or not. But in the 2 playoff games, I think he had like 23 routes for them, which was behind, basically in line with what Wicks did. So we've both got Watson in the mid 80s in targets, though, as the wide receiver 2 for Green Bay. But another one where you mentioned better in best ball, but Reed and Watson, unfortunately, I'd like to have more of them, but I haven't gotten there with how we're projecting it.
I just want to say that I thought, just to emphasize that I thought those notes you gave on Reed and the 2 receiver sets were really strong. And I sometimes make adjustments while we're talking. I moved him down I often move like a half percentage point of target share. I moved him down a full percentage point in target share on that, because I think that's a really meaningful point. So great pull there. Watson, year 1, really strong. Targets per out run, really strong. Yards per out run. The targets per out run were down 4.5 percentage points. The yards per target was down, even though the ADOT was up. So when you adjust for ADOT, like I like to with some of my efficiency, he looked more like an inefficient receiver last year. Obviously was playing hurt. Your mileage may vary on that. But there was some concern, at least for me, in his rookie year, that Aaron Rodgers was publicly talking about trying to get him the Rookie of the Year title. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was he talked about it in a post-game press conference once where Watson made some bad plays late in the game. They're trying to get him a TD in the red zone, and he was like, "This guy wants to be Offensive Rookie of the Year, and he needs to do better than that," or something like that. It was not just an allusion to it, but a clear admission of it. I felt like they were forcing some targets to Christian Watson a little bit his rookie year, and so that last year to me was validation of that to some degree, maybe confirmation bias, if you want to put it that way. Mm-hmm. But I think his role is very secure. And now that his price is cheaper, you're talking about the clear speedster, athletic, vertical downfield option. To me, Wicks and Dobbs have more overlapping skill sets, whereas Watson threatens the safeties in a way that you want him out there on basically every pass concept that you can get him out there, if that his hamstrings can hold up for. So I do think the routes are more stable for him than the other guys when you really try to dig into all of it. But I just wanted to note, I mentioned he had the higher weighted targets per out than Jaden Reed last year, but even that was down meaningfully from his rookie year. It's just really flat here. All of these guys are first-year or second-year players. Last year were first-year or second-year players, including Bo Melton. And so we continue to have some uncertainty relative to upside cases too. If Wicks really breaks out, or if Bo Melton is a meaningful player, or if Tucker Kraft breaks out as a second tight end, it's going to change how we look at Jaden Reed. Like you said, if Reed's not playing in 2 receiver sets, it doesn't have to be Watson or Dobbs. It could mean more Tucker Kraft in these 2 tight ends. Yeah. Right, or something.
It's quite challenging. The one that I kind of I like the boring guy the most, which sometimes happens with me, but I do like Romeo Dobbs at his price, where I feel most confident in him leading the team in routes. I don't think he's quite as good as some of these other guys, but I think that's factored in to price a decent bit. He was at 1.63 yards per out run last year. That pales in comparison to Wicks, who was at 197, Reed also at 197. This is including the playoff games, the numbers I'm looking at. So it's not a bad number. It's just not up there with Reed and Wicks. So I've got him at 85 targets. You're a little bit more bearish at 75. I'm guessing that's, talent related. And that's, part of what makes this so complex is the revolving doors of like talent versus like who they're actually gonna play.
Yeah, and some of the role stuff that I just mentioned, where I'm kind of not trying to get the Dobbs plus Wicks numbers too high. I do think Dobbs is going to play, and I think he's going to have his moments. I guess I would be more concerned about the routes thing that you mentioned, because I think if Wicks meaningfully breaks out, and they keep talking about him, like they keep comparing him to Devonta Adams, which is obviously high praise. And he had the numbers last year you just mentioned. The yards per out run were fantastic. If he breaks out, I kind of feel like you still have Reed in this move role, getting the touches around the line of scrimmage. And then if you have to have Wicks on the field, then you're probably taking Dobbs off because you're still using Watson as his vertical threat because of the way that works schematically for you against the safeties and everything. So it's not going to be that cut and dry because they're going to rotate within games. I think we're going to see route rates in the 60% of dropbacks, not 90%, so that they can get all four of these guys out there, which again, that makes it tough in managed leagues. It makes it easier in best ball where like when the touchdowns go that direction, the targets go that direction in a given week, it hits your lineup, but it's tricky. Yeah. I guess I like Wicks's efficiency. Like you said, it is probably a little bit of a bet on talent that I've been out on Dobbs, because I think that Wicks is cheaper and more of a bet on a true breakout if he can just earn a consistent role.
Yeah. And that's it. Wicks is, I've seen his price tag kind of like go in waves a little bit over the offseason. I'm drafting Wicks and Dobbs, I think a little bit more, just like kind of taking the cheaper guys in this room and taking them even a little bit ahead of our projection and our rank, to try to get more access to this wide receiver room. And it is one that's just difficult to project. Just one last note on Dobbs, obviously his stuff is going to look better if you include the playoff games last year, which we're doing. I don't know if I have too much more on the receiver. It's challenging because they all have upside. I mean, I've even taken some last round Bo Melton if I have a Jordan Love stack where there's some contingent upside on the Watson injury and whatnot.
I truly think they're better in best ball group where you're going to get usable weeks and spike weeks from all throughout this group, but you're probably not going to get consistency throughout. And that's part of why I guess I'm playing it through the cheaper options. I should probably have some Dobbs. To your point, 6 catches, 151 yards and a TD in that first playoff game, 4 catches, 83 yards against the Niners. I mean, very strong. 2 of his best games of the entire year. Very strong production in the playoffs when it mattered the most. Like, they have faith in this guy. They trust him. That's what that tells me. I mean, they were using him and relying on him when it mattered most. Watching the games during the regular season, and I've been a Dobbs guy, there was a lot of situations where like he just would have a hard time. Like his efficiency stuff was his own fault for me at times. Like near the sideline, bobbling a ball, going out of bounds, and then not getting 2 feet in. That happened a few times with him. And it's like, it's maddening. It's like either catch it cleanly or don't go out of bounds so quickly because he like juggled it. And then they end up reviewing it. They're like, oh yeah, he just went out on his own accord while juggling the ball and didn't actually get 2 feet in. It's like, okay, you just lost a reception. Like, don't do that,
At the tight end position, it's sort of more the same for me where I'm taking more of the cheaper option. You've got Luke Musgrave versus Tucker Kraft. Of course, Kraft, I'm trying to word the injury correctly. It sounded quite horrible. He was bench pressing and the pec came off the bone or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It didn't sound great, but it does sound like he'll be back this year. And I've still been taking him last round. Just compared to like some of the other options out there. I think that the end of season upside for Kraft's pretty good as like a way to get access to this offense. Have been taking less Musgrave. I don't think, again, like I think the price is fine on Musgrave. Just haven't, I guess, taken a lot of tight ends in that range. We talked about Pat Freiermuth on the last podcast, who I was a little bit more overpriced than Musgrave, but it's a similar range where I just generally, once I've hit that range, I either have my tight ends or I'm waiting a little bit longer.
I take a little bit of Musgrave. And it's just, it's not disagreeing with your position. It's just sort of playing it a little bit different in the sense of being like, well, he is a year 2 guy. He was a little better than Tucker Kraft at earning volume last year. I mean, my target sprout run right up over at my Substack, I wrote, neither of them really, this was back in March, neither of them really moved the needle last year. Watching them, I wasn't left feeling like the Packers have a clear future tight end out of these two. I also noted I wasn't saying they're definitely misses, but we just tend to assume this linear progression, and like there's no like nothing in their data that's like this guy's definitely going to be a star. Having said that, year 2 player, now that Kraft's going to miss a lot of the offseason work as well, and then the efficient offense stuff, the market's really into Jordan Love, really into the Green Bay passing game, and the uncertainty at receiver that we're talking about as well. Like Musgrave relative to other late round tight ends at least feels like a little bit of an upside bet, but it's also, it feels like a floor bet too. Like the receivers all hit and the tight ends don't matter in this passing game suddenly, which could happen. They could be splitting work and a lower tight end target share overall. And then it's like, well, you didn't want any Packers tight end, or Kraft could be better than him to the point, the way that you're playing it. So it's tricky. I just think there's like a wide band here where you could play some upside if you wanted to.
Let's go to Chicago, where we're both expecting things to be a little bit different this year with the switch at quarterback, bringing Caleb Williams in and not having Justin Fields. And we're pretty similar in terms of the play calling, right around league average plays per game, right around league average called pass rate. That's 60.5% called pass rate, about 63.5 plays per game. It looks like you have maybe a slightly lower sack rate than us on Chicago, just looking at the translation to pass attempts versus rush attempts, but we're pretty similar. And the Caleb line for us spits out like somewhat similar. You're more bullish than us, which I like to see because we're pretty bullish on this offense, on the efficiency. We've got about 3,900 yards. You're at 4,250. We're about 24 passing touchdowns. You're 28. So yeah, but I'm pretty into Caleb Williams and this offense overall for Chicago.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of a leap of faith for me here. But I have the Bears being good, willing to throw relative to, the rookie QB element where we would expect that to keep pass rate down a little. Pat Thorman had some positive notes on Waldron in his ETR Pace article that we love to talk about. And obviously Caleb Williams is an incredible player. And I mean, I'm just naturally going to be a lot higher on this receiving core as well. I've always been a big time Keenan Allen guy. I love the reference targets per out run. That's his stat. I've always been a big time DJ Moore guy from a skill perspective. And I am a UW alum who happens to love Odunze as well. So I'm probably higher than anyone in the industry on the collective wide receivers here. I also really like Cole Kmet from a talent perspective. I think Caleb Williams, everyone's talked about him stepping into the best situation for a rookie QB of all time. And I think it's like one of the best situations in the entire NFL, that this is a really well put together receiving core. I think they complement each other's skill sets really well. I mean, I think it's super, super fun.
Yeah, we also have their weighted team total. If you come average like their weeks 1 through 14 with their weeks 15 to 17 Vegas team totals at 23.3 points per game, league average at 22.7. So that's an increase for Chicago from what we saw last year. And that I know gave me more confidence too when I was going through the projections. And once we got those numbers, just seeing where the TDs aligned, it was like, oh, we're actually short on TDs as opposed to high on TDs. Let's take this to the running backs, though. I did move a little bit of carry share before we went on, but DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson is the backfield. We're at about 180 carries for Swift, 125 for Herbert, 78 for Roschon. You're very similar, a little bit less on Swift. You're at 170, but then 122 for Herbert, 75 for Roschon. I know Herzig is making me very fearful of Swift, saying he thinks Herbert's actually going to outcarry DeAndre Swift. I don't know if I'm totally buying that. I think it could be closer than people think, but there's part of me that still wants to be in on Swift, where I think he's still an explosive player, and he is someone that's shown, an ability to be involved in the passing game. And we're both at about 55 targets for Swift. And if we think the offense is going to be good, I do like taking him around pick 90 or so where he goes.
I've been taking him too, and I'm with you. I've made some bull cases on Swift this offseason. One note I will make about Caleb that plays into this a little bit. He had 27 collegiate rush TDs, 10 plus both of his years at USC, and he also had 6 while he was in a part-time role at Oklahoma as a true freshman. Those are big numbers for a college quarterback. I wrote by comparison, Anthony Richardson had 9 in his 1 year as a starter. I guess because I had been talking about Anthony Richardson's rush TDs on our other show. But Caleb, yeah, I mean, not as high in the rush yardage numbers, but I wrote that there, you know, in my notes here, there's possible skill element here where he is running a high rush TD rate because of kind of the way he handles things in the red zone. Just willing to kind of, you know, shrunk field, willing to kind of get through his progressions quicker and run for it. Certainly an athletic player. So a little sneaky touchdown upside maybe for him on the ground, which got me a little bit back off Swift because, well, I mean, not way off of him, but the thing about Swift that excites me is I talk about the stat high value touches. Sometimes it's a combination of receptions and green zone touches inside the 10, because the vast majority of running back points come through the receiving game or through touchdowns. Swift went to an offense last year in Philly where he actually got a decent amount of green zone touches, but he got tackled on the one a bunch of times, and then they did the tush push a bunch, right? And Jalen Hurts has 15 rush TDs. He doesn't get the TD upside from that green zone role, and he catches a lot fewer passes because of a mobile quarterback. Now, I just mentioned Caleb Williams is a little bit mobile, but I do think you're going to see Swift catch more passes in this offense than he did last year. When you look at his receiving profile in the Detroit seasons, the goal line stuff is intriguing because Roschon Johnson, a little bit of a bigger back. I gave him a little bit of a higher TD rate. I think he might get used as that hammer, or Khalil Herbert, who's like the better pure rusher when you look at the advanced rushing, as you mentioned. Herzig had talked about being pretty high on him. At the same time, they gave Swift guaranteed money, not just this year, but into next year. And I've had people reference Miles Sanders, where he loses his job on skill in year one of a contract that had guaranteed money into year two. I don't think that should be like the norm. I think that's an outlier. Usually when teams give a guy a 2-year deal, the usage tends to follow the first year. They might lose their job the second year when they're easy to cut in the offseason. Like the Panthers are in a weird spot where they can't really cut Miles Sanders because of the guaranteed money. They're keeping him this year probably, but they've drafted Jonathan Brooks and they're moving forward. I do think that commitment to Swift is meaningful. He was signed the first day of free agency to a bigger deal than any of us were really expecting. Herbert's good and has good efficiency numbers, but I have Swift solidly out carrying him. And then I have Swift solidly out targeting Roschon, who I think is kind of the threat for the third down, long down and distance type role. I do take some Herbert and Roschon late, both of them, because I think both of them are going to have, I think Herbert's more going to have a meaningful standalone role, and Roschon maybe more upside to the passing stuff if Swift were to miss time, the high value touch stuff if Swift were to miss time. But I don't know. I mean, Swift's going to an offense where it fits his skill set a little better. You mentioned the efficiency that he's had at times in his career. If he catches more passes, if he gets a chance to score a few more touchdowns or just runs a little hotter on the touchdowns, it's a good offense. They're going to score points. That's why I like kind of in all the running backs.
I've got a lot of Herbert for those reasons where I just think the backfield is underpriced in general. I might be a little bit more on a Roschon fade here and leaning into the other two, but definitely agree that it's just kind of an underpriced backfield right now. If this offense it's got a lot of talent and Vegas is buying in, and and that extends to the receivers, which we'll go to. And this is a really interesting conversation because it's one of these receiver rooms that is seems like tough for guys to build out the right amount of targets, but I still think there's value here. We'll start with DJ Moore, who I've got at 115 targets. You're at 118 targets. Puts us really similar lines overall, about 210 full PPR fantasy points over the course of the season, basically 75 for 1,006. And Moore is a guy last year where I feel a combination of like, I'm taking an L where I was wrong on him, but I also feel like it's true that can be true. And also we ran really bad on Moore's outcome as people that were more Bears last year, where he had some fluky games like against Washington and against Detroit. And then it was like a very up and down season. You definitely saw the floor, and a lot of the stuff we were worried about came to fruition in terms of pass volume and stuff. He was just played that good and was insane from an efficiency perspective. So moving that to this year, it's tough, where I'm like giving him more credit, but now he's also got competition he didn't have, and ultimately like come out with him. I think I'm a little more bullish just based on our previous conversations, where I think he's fine where he goes, especially in like half PPR, where maybe I can lean in on the efficiency a little bit more. But not like a strong take. I think your strong take is more on Keenan Allen, who you have leading this room with 128 targets. We're at 113. And I know we're ahead of market on Keenan Allen with our projection. That's even a little more conservative than yours.
Yeah, this is one of the clear spots where I think the market is wrong in the entire player pool right now. And I love DJ Moore, and I was off him last year with you as well, and I agree with your assessment. He, even with a 45-point game and half PPR, was 14.1 half PPR points per game, was wide receiver 12 in points per game. That's good. And he did score the 45-point game, and he did have some other ceiling games. But to your point, he had a bunch of single-digit games too. That was some of the concern. That was mostly related to Fields. The concern this year, I would say, is different. DJ Moore's best number 2 wide receiver of his career is probably Curtis Samuel. He's never played in an offense with 3+ good receiver or tight ends. Like, yes, Christian McCaffrey's been in some of those. There was a year where he had Robbie Chosen and Curtis Samuel and him. So I guess maybe that's the one year you could say it, but it was hyper concentrated on those 3. And he wasn't I don't think he led the team in targets that year. Robbie Chosen was the target leader that year. Working backward, the next highest wide receiver or tight end in targets in DJ Moore offenses. This is the list of, other than DJ Moore, the other highest player: Cole Kmet, Terrace Marshall, Robbie Chosen, Curtis Samuel, Devin Funchess. He's never played with a Keenan Allen, right? Perhaps more relevant, he's had like Shi Smith and Jarius Wright and tight ends like Ian Thomas routinely getting like 30 targets as the 3rd best player in a lot of those Carolina offenses. And last year, Cole Kmet was there, but Darnell Mooney had a really low target earning season. Keenan, and so that's relevant because if you look at his targets per out run profile, he's been strong but not elite. And even last year was strong but not elite, like very good but not like massively elite in terms of, he's more of an efficiency wide receiver. Keenan Allen has also not had like the toughest competition in the world, especially if you're not super into Mike Williams. And yet he has earned volume in an elite way every year. His targets per hour run consistently very, very high. I know that he's a little bit older and that plays into this, but I think with DJ Moore, you're definitely playing him as an efficiency play. The biggest thing for me in this projection, like I have Keenan and DJ Moore close in targets. I think this is like as high as I can get on DJ Moore. Like I'm trying to get it closer to market.
No, that's fair. I was gonna say I think we're slightly fudged here, where we're like, I guess the big thing is just like the change of team stuff. But how much does the change of team stuff even matter with like a new quarterback?
When you have a different coordinator, different quarterback.
That's where, gun to my head, I'd say like Keenan Allen should have a higher target share. I think we have a little bit of like age built into, I guess, the target share projection too, but it is slightly fudged to get DJ Moore, on even footing with Keenan Allen. Like if you were projecting week 1, it'd be tough to say DJ Moore is going to out target Keenan Allen.
And I'm not saying Moore's bad. He's hyper efficient, super good with the ball in his hand, always lots of yards after the catch, good catch rates, good at all depths of the field. I think he's a star, actually. I routinely argue that his early career TD rates would spike, and they have the last couple years, but also would remind people that people used to think DJ Moore couldn't score touchdowns at one point, right? And now we're playing him as this hyper efficiency player. There's reasons to be at least a little bit concerned that he's in a pass game now with Keenan Allen and with a top 10 wide receiver, because that's the other part of it. And like in my notes, I wrote there's an obvious target crunch here. Keenan for 128 targets, which I have, feels low to his profile. I would also add that DJ Moore for 118, which I have, is low for his profile. But I would also add that Odunze is low for what I would normally project a top 10 drafted wide receiver. I would even say that Cole Kmet's projection here is low for his target shares. Every meaningful player, like it's exactly what you said when we got to the receivers. Like it's really hard to project them for enough volume. There's good contingent upside. I would like to draft all of them. I find myself drafting Keenan, Odunze, and Kmet a lot more because the DJ Moore price for me is really hard relative to what I see as sort of his target range.
Yeah. I think that's kind of where I'm at, where it's like, I think DJ Moore probably should be going first to these guys. I'm even with DJ Moore. I don't want to be underweight. but the value is probably coming in Keenan Allen and Odunze in particular for me. And I've come around on Kmet some as well. So Keenan too, where he goes relative to the receivers too, like even in some of these more receiver heavy rooms, he's going as wide receiver 34 on FFPC, which is full PPR. We talked about George Pickens on the last episode. He's going as wide receiver 20. Like Keenan Allen's going 18 picks after George Pickens, playing with a better quarterback and with clearly a better target earning profile in full PPR. Like that's crazy. So in terms of your odds of smashing ADP, I think it goes to Keenan Allen. Let's talk Odunze, the rookie here. You've got 80 targets. I've got 97. And to your point, like just where a receiver top 10 overall draft pick, he goes 9th overall, third wide receiver off the board, was probably closer to neighbors than to Brian Thomas in terms of most like consensus big board stuff. And Brian Thomas being the wide receiver 4 in the NFL draft. And I think we have a chance where this is a really condensed offense, and it seems, and the target competition is like a factor, but it's also like none of these peripheral guys are getting work. That's another thing we talked about with Pittsburgh. You were looking at the Arthur Smith and like the 10th, 11th guys having more target share than normal. I don't know. I guess am I wish casting this, or is this really going to be the way it plays out is the big thing. But I'm hopeful that it's condensed enough that these guys are like pretty good in a breakout offense if no one gets hurt, and then all have like really nice upside if someone gets hurt. And that makes Odunze to me like just really one of my higher exposure wide receivers in drafts thus far.
That's sort of how I'm thinking about it. There's a little bit of concern with his age-adjusted production profile that he was more productive later in college, but his second season, Washington only played 4 games in the pandemic year. He didn't really play. He didn't play a ton as a true freshman either. But that was his first season. But his second year, they still had the same head coach. They get Kalen DeBoer. They get the transfer Michael Penix in 2022, and he immediately has an 1,100-yard season, then 1,600 yards last year. Everything else around Odunze, other than like some minor concerns about the age-adjusted stuff, which, by the way, like he wasn't running a ton of routes early on, but his targets per route and per route stuff was still like okay. Some of the efficiency was low early in his college career. Everything else really, really positive. All the scout reports. I know Matt Harmon's reception perception gave him like a full green profile, which was like one of the first prospects ever. Everybody's like, this guy does all the things right. He's like the hardest worker. If you hear, any of the stories coming out of UW, that he's a guy that's constantly working on his craft and all those things. I do think early, so people are worried about like who's going to get the JSN role in the Shane Waldron offense, because last year JSN kind of didn't really get a clear role as the third receiver. People have talked about Odunze getting stuck with that, and then other people have said, look, he's a very different receiver. He's not the slot receiver. I will say I don't think Keenan Allen is like going to get dinged because JSN was the slot receiver in the Shane Waldron offense last year. I think Keenan Allen's going to play in 2 receiver sets, and Odunze is going to have to work his way in a little bit. Like that's just going to be part of it. So I am projecting him a little bit lower in target share, and yet I also think Odunze is going to be in a better spot to succeed than JSN. It's a totally different situation. JSN was coming with a broken wrist. You have a whole different situation for a variety of reasons. Different skill set, obviously, for Odunze. Plays outside more of a vertical receiver. And then there's also the part where, like, if, the contingent upside, if either of the big 2 guys ahead of him misses some time, that Odunze is clearly going to play a lot more. They really like Odunze enough that even after trading for Keenan Allen, they went and took him in the top 10. So,
yeah. And to the JSN comparisons, you make some good points on it not being the same, but even if we called it the same, like Odunze, I guess this isn't calling it the same, but like Odunze was drafted earlier than JSN. He's playing with a better quarterback. And like also the JSN thing could have, like, it only happened one way, but it could have worked out. Like it wasn't doomed, I don't think. And the wrist injury and like Metcalf and Lockett missed like 1 game combined. And yeah. I guess my point is that you're right that it's not an accurate comparison, but like even if it was, it's not as bad as it probably looks on paper.
Right. That's the way I'm thinking about it as well.
Let's hear the Cole Kmet take because you seem bullish here.
Well, he had a really strong season last year. We know tight ends take a little longer to break out. It was year 4 for him, but he was a 21-year-old rookie who had a solid production profile coming out of Notre Dame, has a good skill set. Last year, easily set a career high in targets per out run by about 3 percentage points in an offense where, Justin Fields actually artificially lowered the targets per out run stuff and the per out volume because of the sack numbers and the scramble numbers. So you're running a lot of empty routes essentially. There's 2 ways to look at that. Maybe the guys weren't getting open enough, but DJ Moore's targets per out run were not much higher than Cole Kmet's is the point that I would make, about a percentage point and a half higher. It wasn't like some elite targets per out run on Moore's side either, which is, I'm also giving him a little bit of credit from the Fields side of things here. But that means that Kmet to me also had kind of a sneaky breakout season last year, clearly a career high yards per out run, 1.69. And I just think he's a good tight end. I think he's going to be a solid long-term tight end. He's kind of coming into his prime right now. The concern is the Gerald Everett stuff, that Shane Waldron's had him in multiple other offenses and used him a lot. And I do think that's a legit annoying element to like what we could see from Cole Kmet. But I also don't think like Gerald Everett's getting a little older. He opened on the NFI list this offseason. Like, I don't think it definitely has to play out that way where Gerald Everett's like cutting into Cole Kmet. I think people think that the presence of Everett also means a lot of 2 tight end sets, which gets back to that question of who's coming off the field of the wide receivers in 2 tight end sets. But like, what if they're not running a lot of 2 tight end sets because they have these 3 receivers,
Yeah.
And then exactly. Kmet is out there as the only tight end. And then, Kmet's not going to be one of the top 2 target earners in this offense, which is one of those things that you look for in a later round tight end. Like, is there enough target availability? And there's not. And it's hard to project him for big numbers. But I still like betting on the profile and maybe some of the contingent upside and, good offense, just maybe hit on some efficiency, some spike weeks, at least in best ball. Tougher and managed, I think.
Yeah, and I'll note we have Kmet at 66 targets, Ben's at 78, but even with our projection, we had him a spot ahead positionally. We have him straight up ahead of Pat Freiermuth, who we talked about really not liking the last podcast. And if you have that stance when you need a tight end in that range, it's going to be Kmet. He goes a lot later than Dalton Schultz, and he goes later than Freiermuth, who we have flipped. Let's go to Minnesota. Another tricky one with the huge quarterback change. Obviously, Kirk Cousins goes to Atlanta in free agency. Minnesota drafts J.J. McCarthy, but it sounds like most people here are assuming that Sam Darnold is the starting quarterback to begin the year. In terms of overall play calling, you've got them at 62.1 plays per game. I'm at 63. You're at 61.5% called pass rate. I'm at 62.6%. So I'm leaning in a little bit to what they've done in the past and being more aggressive. I'm guessing you're baking in a little bit more risk in terms of the quarterback drop off.
Yeah, I think I'm factoring them having. I'm playing. I have McCarthy playing 65% of the dropbacks and Darnold 35%. I do think Darnold starts. I do think McCarthy plays the majority of the season. I have the pass rate over expected, thus moving toward run leaning because of a rookie QB, even though the pass rate has been very solid in these O'Connell offenses. And I think that's a real intent thing with him that's worth noting. But yeah, I mean, they have a lower win total as well. So that's going to hurt the plays, but also probably elevate the pass rate. You're throwing in these situations. I don't know. I mean, they're not like the market doesn't have them as expected to be particularly good, but there's stuff with Kevin O'Connell that is promising. I guess I'm just not real high on the Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy quarterback situation.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's where I have some enthusiasm because you mentioned the Kevin O'Connell stuff where the pass rates last year playing with like bad quarterbacks who were like not prepared to play, Jaron Hall games, Josh Dobbs coming in with like no practice, and like they were still high and they let those guys chuck. That gives me some optimism that they can figure it out. I want to be really in on JJ McCarthy. I was earlier in the offseason just because I thought the environment could really prop him up between the play calling and having Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. Starting to get more concerned with like a looming Addison suspension, sounding more and more likely that McCarthy, can't win this camp battle, which doesn't mean he won't be useful second half, but you just bring in more risk there and less upside when, as opposed to some of these other rookie quarterbacks like Bo Nix, who we've talked about, who like could legitimately be starting day one. So I'm torn on this one. I really want to like it, but it's, probably more heart than head in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, they're playing in a dome. He has at least a little bit of mobility and he has great weapons, but I haven't pulled the trigger a lot. I guess I'm just not confident.
And I'm leaning into the bull case with the pass volume with what they did last year. But obviously with McCarthy, one of the big concerns with him is that he played at Michigan and did not have to throw the ball. Mm-hmm. So that's like the, flip side to my bull case there. So
that's a big part of it. For me, that's a big part. It's a great point, worth at least like mentioning that like he didn't throw a ton in college, and some of the rate metrics, especially when you control for like play action and stuff, the accuracy wasn't great. I think it's harder for me. There's a lot of uncertainty projecting rookie QBs to the NFL. So I'm not saying I'm confident in anything. I think it's just hard for me to expect him to step into an NFL offense and be a 40 pass per game guy that throws at a high level when he wasn't doing that in college, right? He was doing a lot of his passing off play action and after establishing the run and that stuff. You're not projecting him to go anywhere near 40 pass attempts per game, but I'm just saying like to come in and be like the way that O'Connell was doing some of the stuff with some of those quarterbacks last year, it's just like, can he drop right in and be that guy who's a drop back passer that many times? It adds a little more uncertainty to me that he wasn't even doing that in college. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a fair point. And why I've backed off, him being someone that I liked taking late in 3 quarterback builds a lot to someone that I'm trying to wean my exposure down for sure. And going to running back here, we get Aaron Jones coming over in free agency, the assumed RB1 in front of Ty Chandler. Chandler had some success last year down the stretch in place of Alexander Madison. Jones to start this drafting season was such an easy fade for us at ETR. Is one of the guys we had the biggest discrepancies on. The price has since fallen quite a bit, where we're still below market on him, especially on some of the more casual sites, but at least have him in like, okay, this isn't the end of the world range. You've got him at 196 rush attempts. I've got him at 184. We're both at about 52 targets for Aaron Jones, coming to about 197 full PPR points for you, 185 for us.
This is one of those teams where doing the projection emphasized to me how little they have at the RB3 position. And that got me actually in on both of the running backs a little bit more because they're both reasonably priced, even though I'm talking about the offense maybe not being super exciting. Although I do think the run rate could wind up being more run heavy than O'Connell's history because that's what McCarthy might be more prepared for, as I said. But behind Jones and Chandler, and they have typically used CJ Ham for years across multiple coaches as a fullback. There are other running backs that they're going to carry. They may only carry one more, and it's probably Ken Nwangwu, who didn't do a lot in terms of volume even in college. I don't think he ever had 150 touches in offensive touches in a collegiate season. He's a really good athlete, but he's basically a special teams guy. Then they have Dwayne McBride. They have Myles Gaskin. They were cutting and re-signing the practice squad all last year. McBride was on the team last year, didn't make the roster, didn't make a splash even when they were sort of rotating. They went and got Akers. They eventually went to Ty Chandler. I think they really like Ty Chandler. I think Chandler's going to play a good amount and have a standalone role alongside Jones. But what you're talking about for Jones's role, like he was still efficient last year. He's an older back. You got to factor in some concern for age-related risk. The key for me is like, I feel pretty, unless they, develop Dwayne McBride in a certain way, or they use Nwangwu in a way they haven't really used him before, I feel pretty confident it's going to be these two guys as a 1-2 punch in this backfield. And they're going to kind of work off each other and be whatever, close to 50-50, probably 60-40 towards Jones is more likely. But regardless, like if the number 3 is not really getting factored in, that concentrates things. on these two guys in a way that I want to be over. I think one of them is a hit. You know, I want
Yeah,
to be overweight.
I'm very in on Ty Chandler as a result, as the younger, cheaper back here. I think we all kind of ATR think that this is like a 1A, 1B scenario more so than it is Jones lead, Chandler clear backup. And to your point, with a lack of behind him, I mean, you mentioned Marshawn Lloyd being a little bit of like base work plus contingent upside. I think Chandler, even more base work, a little less upside because the offense with this quarterback situation compared to Green Bay's is like the scoring expectations are lower. But yeah, he's someone that I've been drafting a decent bit.
He had 11.8 rushes per game in the final 8 games. He only had 8 total prior in the first 9 games. Special team snaps, he was playing some. They dropped off as his offensive snaps increased. They were saying really good things about him in the offseason. And they go get Aaron Jones. And like they needed some depth at running back. It would not surprise me at all if this is a 50-50 split, honestly. Like they seem to turn to Ty Chandler last year and like him. The 1A, 1B, as you said. I don't think people think Ty Chandler is going to be more of a clear backup than he's likely to be. But Jones is this efficiency play that I think you can still make at his cost too. I mean, if you're willing to take on some risk. Yeah.
Let's go to wide receiver. We both have Justin Jefferson around 160 targets, just under 1,400 receiving yards, around 8 touchdowns. Just an absurd line. For us, that honestly puts him like 5th overall, wide receiver 4, and like pretty close to like Amon-Ra. I think I struggle with Jefferson because there's like we were talking about the bell curve, the middle brain and the left side, right side thing. The like left side, right side for me on Justin Jefferson is like, he's the best wide receiver in the league. Like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And then the middle for me is like, well, these other guys up here now are really, really good. And if you look at the top half of the draft, this is by far the most dangerous situation systemically compared to Amon-Ra, Tyreek, Chase, Lamb. Like those guys are playing with solidified quarterback positions in offenses with really high scoring expectations.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole conversation on Jefferson. And I go back and forth on it. Like, he is incredibly good. And I don't want to not be drafting Justin Jefferson. I think he can elevate situation. At the same time, like, to what degree, right? Like, we have Hockenson out early in the year. The hope was that Addison would be a really good sidekick. But now if he misses early in the year, you're talking about Jefferson being the only game in town. And he's good enough to beat double teams and all of that, but there is a tricky element when like the next best receiving weapons are like Robert Tonyan and Brandon Powell, which is like what it might be in week 1. And you're playing with, Sam Darnold or a rookie quarterback, and the catchable target rate's not great. Devontae Adams last year had 175 targets and really poor efficiency. Really dropped off from prior seasons. Jefferson's always been efficient. But I kind of think about that season for Adams last year where he didn't have a lot of other people around him and there's more defensive attention. They're kind of still having to force the ball toward him, but the efficiency isn't really there. It's tough for the quarterback play to get the ball into these windows. It's like you can definitely see scenarios where Jefferson's just a little bit of a frustrating first-round pick. I can also see scenarios where I look back on it and go, how did Justin Jefferson go 6th or 7th overall, right? Like,
yeah. And we're just comparing the receivers, but in like home leagues and some of these other formats where like you get really good receiver values around 7 and 9, like I'm tempted to even take like Bijan Robinson over him, who we're both very bullish on if you listen to the NFC South set that we did. So it's tough. I do think your point about Addison's a really good one where you're worried about him missing time, because I've seen a lot out there in the community that like, oh, we dropped Addison's ADP because of suspension risk, but we didn't increase anybody else's on Minnesota. That's wrong. And I'm like, I don't know if that's wrong. Like at a certain point, like Justin Jefferson's going to get the volume he's already going to get.
Right.
TJ Hawkinson's a back-weighted production guy anyways, that like likely Addison's suspension would be early in the year. I don't think that materially change it. I don't know. I don't really see the need that like just because Addison comes down that you need to bump other players. I don't think that's incorrect by the market to have done what it's done. And
yeah, it just makes the passing game worse probably. Like now it's just Justin Jefferson and no one else. It might hurt the pass rate. I certainly think it's going to hurt the efficiency. Like the big thing to me is at a certain point, you need at least some degree of competence running routes around you. I mean, maybe Justin Jefferson doesn't. He's superhuman. Like he's the best route runner in the NFL probably, but it would be nice to have Jordan Addison as a threat on the field in the play design, as opposed to that, like taking targets away from Jefferson or something like that. I mean, you get down to a point where it's like, well, no, I'm going to let Sam Darnold throw passes to Brandon Powell rather than let Justin Jefferson beat me. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's what the defense is going to do. They're going to triple team Jefferson in these situations. It's going to be tough for him to succeed despite that. So yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I don't think you like bump Jefferson. I do think there's some, like one of the big things in the projection that's holding him down for me is TDs, because the market expectation of the offense is low. Jefferson's TD rate is lower than all of those other top receivers you named. I have all of them projected for more TDs. Amon-Ra is the only one that's even really close. Like Chase and those guys are at least a full touchdown and a half higher. Tyreek Lamb are like two touchdowns higher. But I do think there's these scenarios where you're like, okay, Justin Jefferson, again, just like elevates and just like I have him at 7.7 touchdowns. Do I really think he can't score 10 touchdowns? No. Like I think Justin Jefferson can score 10 touchdowns even in this situation. And so it's like, I mean, it's a hard one to figure out for me. I don't have a strong take on it.
Yeah. Where are you on Addison now that we've got, it seems pretty likely he's going to get suspended at some point. He was going in like the Jackson Smith and Jigba rookie wide receiver range before. And archetypically makes sense. Like year 2 guy, like some encouraging signs year 1, but not like huge smash signs. Like where are you on him?
Yeah, I mean, he was efficient in year 1, tends to lead to year 2 volume. There's not a lot of competition if he's out there. I think there are reasons to like him as a play at that cost. He immediately started falling in a lot of my like slow drafts. He was going later in the 7th round in underdog. And I was like in that range in a lot of this group of slow drafts I'd entered. And I was like, man, this is a tricky thing where you're getting to the end of what I like to talk about is this like wide receiver window. You're getting to where like Jameson Williams is sort of that transition pick. And then you get to like Lockett and Curtis Samuel and those guys that come off, sort of as the next players, but there's a gap in ADP between those rookies you were talking about. And so now Addison's falling into that gap and maybe falling through that gap in some of these. And I still see like the back-weighted production upside case where it's like he probably still adds something to these builds where like you're running out of upside wide receivers and you're getting to like some of the boring olds and it gets a little trickier. So he's tough because he was right before that window and I do think he should fall, but there's no guarantee yet that he's suspended. And now the price puts him in this range where you're like, man, like he might be a unique upside, late season upside play relative to some of the other, like kind of like where people were taking Jameson Williams last year. But Addison has a little bit of a better year 1 than Jameson Williams had. And Williams was suspended and was going like pick 100. Yeah. And Addison's now falling into like the 80s in some of these. And I'm actually starting to like take that value a little bit just because of the structural stuff. I don't like clicking his name right now. I'll say that.
Yeah. I don't have much to add there. That all makes sense to me. There's not a ton behind Addison. We've got Brandon Powell each for around 45 targets, Sherfield for around 30 targets, and about 10 targets for Jalen Naylor. Anybody there that of interest to you?
I think you have to be really talented to overcome some potential concerns about quarterback efficiency and the overall offense. I don't think you just play into like expected target rate or something, like you were saying. If Addison's going to fall, doesn't mean someone has to rise. They have to be good, right? Jefferson's a tricky one because he could elevate the situation. I don't think any of these guys are talents that can elevate a situation like this.
Let's go Hockenson. We're both around 60 targets for him. Obviously, some uncertainty with when he makes his way back from injury. Last episode, we talked about Nick Chubb, and I feel similar with Hockenson. We're like, there can be a really wide range where he goes, where some rooms people just don't want to click the injured guy. And in those rooms, like early in the offseason, these injured guys were so overdrafted that they were like clear fades. Then they kind of fell. And now they're at a point where they've fallen. And sometimes in a specific draft, they have a talent outcome where they can fall, a full round or so past ADP. And I found Hockenson interesting there, especially with like not a ton of late round TE upside this year, getting some of that back weighted production, pairing him with either, two mid-tier tight ends where you've got a bit more volume maturity early, or even an elite tight end build where you might have, you take a LaPorta early, you pair him with Hockenson. LaPorta's got an early buy, but I don't think TE buys matter a ton. But anyways, that maybe gives you entering the fantasy playoffs like two of the top 8 tight ends. Because Hockenson was on track to earn a ton of targets last season prior to the injury.
That's the part of it where I guess I would like the question I'm asking myself on Hockenson is where would I project him with these rookie quarterbacks and losing Kirk Cousins if he wasn't hurt? Because I do think I would be projecting him to be meaningfully down in target volume just as a, because Cousins, I think, elevates that basically, right? He elevates pass rate, he elevates, catchable targets and gets to his progressions a little better. And, some of like the sack rate and, some of those things are going to be, you're getting to Hockenson in the short and intermediate range because you're a good quarterback. And like, I think that was a good fit for Hockenson with Cousins. And then there's the Twitter docs are talking about like week 9. He's not going to play until like week 9 because it was such a late injury. I've taken some Hockenson for sure. The thing is, again, with the point about the actual offense and the quarterbacks and stuff, I'm a little bit worried that the back-weighted production isn't even as strong. Like you said, you would have 2 top 8 tight ends late in the year. I'm a little worried that you don't actually get that top 8, and then you're, okay, I waited for this, and then it didn't even hit in that way. But if he gets, like you said, wide range, if he gets really cheap and he falls too far in a room, I'll take him for sure.
Yeah, I still think like, he's going tight end 14 on DraftKings FFPC. That feels rich to me for sure. Mm-hmm. When I get him closer to tight end 20, then I'm kind of in where I do think the volume upside still will be there.
Yeah.
But you're right. Top 8 is an optimistic outlook on that front. Let's go to Detroit, final team here in this division. We both have them with a lot of plays per game. You're at 65.8. I'm at 65. I'm at just under 58% called pass rate. You're a little bit lower at 56.5%. This is a team that has really high scoring expectations. I was pretty surprised by their Vegas total. They have maybe the second highest over the course of the season. So a lot of faith being put into this offense, and they're pretty good now, which is going to lean into that run rate. But that nets out to still about 35 pass attempts per game because the play volume still keeps them up a decent bit, and about 28 to 29 rush attempts per game. For Goff, we're both just under 300 fantasy points and 4-point passing touchdown leagues. Have him clearing 4,000 yards, have him very efficient.
Yeah, it's a great setup. If Jameson Williams breaks out too, it gets even better. But you already have the breakout Sam LaPorta tight end. You have Amon-Ra, who's a clear multi-year star. If Jahmyr Gibbs does more in the passing game, which he didn't even do that much last year, but he was a hyper-efficient receiving back out of college. There's a lot of reason. They're playing in the dome. All their games have these, like, they got to be the highest expected points scored in their games too, right? Because like their expected points are high. They're like top 5, but then I'm sure they're expected to give up top 5 points as well, right? Like their over-unders are all very high. The look-ahead lines. They're a team that you're expecting for shootouts. They're playing in a bunch of domes. Goff's not going to add any rushing, but I definitely take him. It's a positive environment for a cheap drop back passer who's going to start every game as long as he's healthy and doesn't take a lot of sacks, doesn't take a lot of hits. That's the other thing with Goff. He gets the ball out, has a low sack rate. I feel pretty good about him, his stability, his ability to hold up because he's not running. He's not taking hits. He'll just throw a pick as opposed to taking a hit. He'll just let the ball go. But his pick rate has been pretty okay as well. But he's just not gonna. He's gonna get the ball out. He's not gonna put himself at a lot of danger. I definitely feel like the injury risk is lower for him than other QBs. He's a guy that I like in best ball, especially.
Let's go to the running backs, where both Gibbs and Montgomery were pretty big hits at their price tags last year, which kind of just shows you what an offense that's going to be a little bit run heavier and still score a lot of points, run a lot of plays can do for you, which we're expecting all those things again this year. You've got Gibbs at 200 rush attempts. We're at 184. We're both around 75 targets for him. For Montgomery at 225 rush attempts, we're at 207. Again, our stuff tends to be a little bit more conservative on that raw volume stuff. So pretty similar projections on these guys overall. And yeah, I think Gibbs at the 1-2 turn, it's about where he should go. I vary that pick a lot by what market I'm drafting in. You know, if I'm drafting on underdog, sometimes I have a tough time not just going receiver, knowing how those rooms can go and you can get caught. If I'm drafting on FFPC, where I know come round 7, I'm going to want the wide receiver with almost every pick, and I don't want to be tapped out at wide receiver, I would have rather made that tiebreaker towards running back like Gibbs early. So kind of a neutral, I guess, outlook on his price tag for me.
The weird thing with him was he had a 4.5 yards per target in his rookie year. Hyper efficient receiver in college. Running backs, typically the average is about 6 yards per target. That was a low number for him. In their 3-game playoff run, he had 14 targets and a 6.7 yards per target, which would be like above average. Obviously, that's a very small sample, but it kind of bumps his overall sample a little bit from his rookie year. I mean, I'm kind of fading that, I guess, the lack of explosive plays in the pass game from his rookie year.
I could not care less that his efficiency in the passing game was bad last year. I don't know, right. maybe that's a blind spot, but like based on the success, you know, on the ground at 5.2 yards per carry, the profile we know he has, I just think that receiving stuff for running backs can get funky at times.
Right. Yep, I completely agree. So we're on the same page there. I'm projecting him for 5.8 yards per target, like just slightly below average, probably even light. I maybe should go even higher with that because I think I put more stock on the larger sample from college. And I understand it's a different game at the NFL level, but yeah, he was a rookie last year too. He showed the explosiveness throughout his college sample. And like you said, he showed it as a runner last year too. I would expect him to hit on some big plays that meaningfully impact his receiving efficiency in a positive way. I'm probably light on his receiving efficiency, having it close to league average. I think he's probably an above average receiving efficiency player. Like that's, you know.
Right. Ian Hartitz tweeted out that the receiving lines for Gibbs and Ezekiel Elliott, they were basically the same last year, which is funny. And I just have to needle Davis Maddox because I was like, oh, you should do the human resources meme where the top is like the handsome guy saying something and it's like, thank you. And then the bottom's like this ugly guy and it's like calling HR. I told him, he should do that. He said he was thinking of doing that meme, but he was too lazy. So I fired it off and it got all these engagements and Davis was mega tilting it. The engagement chaser didn't want to put in the 30 seconds of work.
Oh man.
So good job, Davis.
That's beautiful. That said, like, Zeke's efficiency rebounded last year, and we're talking about how Gibbs can't possibly be worse. So, like, that's
yeah. I mean, but there's just like I remember Miles Sanders one year was like, oh, he's a super efficient receiver, and then the next year was like, oh, he's a terrible receiver, and it's like, I just think there's might be a little bit more variance in those running back receiving metrics. Probably better for a deep dive, but. As far as where Montgomery goes, our projections may be a little conservative on Montgomery. You're 20 carries ahead of us. At the end of the day, that spits out about 25 half PPR points. I think really it's less about the carries than I might not be upping this TD rate for him and this Detroit team enough. That actually extends to Gibbs. You've got 9 rush touchdowns for Gibbs. We've got 7. You've got 10.1 for Montgomery. We've got 7.5. So that's one that I want to check a little bit. But if I have a full 0 RB build and I get Montgomery in like 7 or 8, it feels really good compared to the backs that go after him.
I definitely take some Montgomery in that range, sort of depending on the structure and the receivers that are there. But I like getting him when I do. And I don't get enough of him because I am like so obsessed with getting the receiver depth. But to your point, yeah, I have both these guys, Gibbs and Montgomery, in the 11 to 12 touchdown range overall. They both got usage in close. And that's the big, like, why, if I'm projecting Montgomery for more touches, why is Gibbs going higher? Well, the big thing is the high value touches. Like, he's going to catch a lot more balls, and then he still gets touchdown potential. Like, David Montgomery's going to score TDs, but I think Gibbs is as well. And they did that, under Campbell with the past backs that were a similar split. They would have DeAndre Swift with like Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams had the one really big TD year, but Swift got green zone touches too throughout his time there, and sometimes those TD rates were a lot closer. I think they're going to be a lot closer. I mean, Gibbs is a guy they took really high, they like a lot, and he, because Montgomery missed a little time last year, he got to show that he can do all of it, and he did do all of it in those games. He was like a little bit more of a workhorse runner at times when Montgomery was out. So it was a really good rookie year for him. Where, I mean, like, he belongs where he goes. It's a little tricky to see the like true like legendary upside because he has another good back in his backfield. But I mean, it's probably related to that contingency scenario where, Montgomery misses a little time and Gibbs gets to play a lot more.
Receiver Amon-Ra, we've both got for 110 catches, around 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns, really solid line. Seems really safe in all formats, but in particular in PPR. But really at this point, his efficiency is good too. And it is like run heavier offense, and maybe that's more equal than it is in my head. And I guess our ranks sort of bear that out to an extent. And I did not watch the receiver documentary on Netflix. Did you watch that? Yeah.
I haven't watched it. No.
I haven't, but I've heard some people pointing out it sounded like he wasn't even like fully healthy last year and like played through a lot of stuff and still dominated. I mean, I guess everybody's playing through something if you were to have a camera on everyone all year long, but just a note that stuck out to me.
For sure. He went, I mean, irrelevant in regards to, you mentioned how efficient he was. He went from a 2.4 yards per route run in his breakout year to 2.63 last year, which is just I talk about like depth adjusting. So like he's a lower A-dot slot guy. To be the yardage efficiency that he puts up at that A-dot, it's just insane. He's really tremendous. He was as depth adjusted racers like 0.3 over expected, like way higher. His racers like 1.2 both of the last couple years, and the expectation would be like 0.9 or something. It's a very meaningful gap where he's putting up these yards per target. Last year he was 9.0 yards per target at an A-dot of just 8. Like, he's this low A-dot guy, adding a lot of yak, really high catch rate, consistently creating a lot of separation. Goff is the perfect quarterback for him, can hit him in those spots where it gives him, room to run, doesn't like slow him down. On target rate is good. It's a really nice fit. I think people get worried about the slot stuff, but Amon-Ra is a slot plus. Like, he's this elite slot receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about the Justin Jefferson stuff. Like, it's tough to compare who you'd go to between these two guys. I think maybe Jefferson, like 99th percentile ceiling is going to beat Amon-Ra, but a lot more, I think, safety in Amon-Ra. And it's not a bad ceiling. It's just not the probably the nuke ceiling that Jefferson, if everything broke right, would have. A lot of room for wide receiver too here. Someone's going to have to step up, given, no Josh Reynolds here for Detroit. We've both got Jameson Williams in the 80s in targets. This is a spot where I think in redraft leagues, I don't think I'll have a lot of Jameson Williams based on how I draft. I think in best ball, I'm more likely to have it where I just think the receivers that go after him, there's a drop off, and it results in me maybe being a little rosy and optimistic on the Jameson Williams upside case, where I'm like, I need a receiver, and I can sell myself a story on Jameson having a pretty good ceiling here.
Like, that makes some sense about the receiver cliff, but I guess I think about it the other way, where I feel like in redraft I can just cut him if it's bad.
Gotcha.
So, but there's the spike week profile too. I mean, he's the hardest guy maybe in the whole player pool for me. He had these really horrible vibes entering the season last year that we all talked about. Made noise for key downfield run blocks late last year, which was like a kind of a cool thing after he got back from a suspension, was playing, that he was like, putting in a lot of effort Finished the season with 2 touchdowns on a season high 72% snaps in that San Fran playoff game. He caught one and he had the rushing touchdown as well. There's like, if you want to tell yourself a story, like there could be some early career, like Brandon Ayuk stuff where like the positive thing was like Ayuk got in the doghouse early in his career apparently for work ethic. And then he kept his head down, rose above it. His talent won out. It seems like Jameson Williams has done that, has come in and worked really hard and tried to keep his head down and not create more problems than some of his off-field stuff already was creating with the betting and all of that. So and yet I don't find myself taking him that much. And then, you noted that there's room for other receivers. Josh Reynolds is gone. The other guy's Khalif Raymond that I'm pretty into. Pretty strong PPR seasons back-to-back years, per route run seasons, I meant. 1.9 yards per route run in both. He's probably going to add routes this year. I feel like, I made this note, especially if you're not into Jameson Williams, you probably should be getting some Khalif Raymond late. And then I'm not getting enough Khalif Raymond late after I made that note. And I'm also not getting enough Jameson. So it's like, you got to make a choice on one of those.
Yeah. Raymond's a guy we only have at 31 targets. You have 63, but that's someone that I was already kind of chatting on the side with our team. We're probably going to up. I know he's the guy that sticks out in the ESPN open score stuff where it's like all these stud receivers in the top 10 and then Khalif Raymond on a limited sample for the open score stuff. And not that you're buying into that too much, but for an 18th round wide receiver, it doesn't hurt to have that in your favor. Right. And
yeah, I mean, it's the thing that like you're probably already projecting him to gain routes. They were already finding routes for him in this offense when Josh Reynolds was playing a decent amount and they were trying to get some Jameson Williams snaps and all that. He's probably going to be gaining some routes, and the open score stuff, the per route run stuff being good. It doesn't necessarily have to scale perfect when you add raw routes, right? Like you're just like, okay, well, he's good enough to be solid now that we know that he's going to probably add routes, and that seems good, right? Like this is all probably working in a positive direction.
To go to tight end, Sam LaPorta, league winner last year. You've got him at 122 targets. We're at 114. So pretty similar in tight end premium scoring. You're at 264. We're at 255. So really similar projections for us on Sam LaPorta. It's someone that early in the offseason, I thought he was too pricey. We kind of did a second look and thought, maybe the volume here could be better from a target share perspective than we initially thought. And then we kind of bumped him and his price kind of came down a little bit at the same time to where we went from a bit of a fade position on LaPorta to a play position on him. It's tough when you look at him versus all the other tight ends to take the tight end one. Sometimes I think it's like, I can get some of these other guys later, but I do think in half PPR formats, even the tight end premium, he's probably, tight end one. If you wanted to make the case for Kelsey, I think in full PPR tight end premium, I see it where just the team pass volume for Kansas City is going to be higher if you're willing to take on, more of the age risk.
And I made the case on a couple episodes ago on a recent show that I would actually take McBride wide receiver one a little. And Kelsey actually came out as my highest projected tight end, but a little concerned about the age stuff and the potential routes, being limited that they talked about, which we obviously talked about when we did the KC pod. But I guess on LaPorta, like I think he's incredibly good. And the way that I've been putting it is he would still be my dynasty tight end one because you come in and you have the rookie season he did. And I think the floor of talent is clear and the floor of production is going to be clear. At the same time, this is an offense where there's competition for targets. We talked about Gibbs' receiving role potentially increasing. Amon-Ra St. Brown is an absolute stud. Now, if he were to go down, that could meaningfully change things for LaPorta. But also, if Jameson Williams does hit in any kind of a way, that changes things. LaPorta was awesome last year. I will note that he had 10 touchdowns on 120 targets, which is a really high touchdown rate to maintain. And is part of why he was so good in fantasy, because his yards per target were like just fine. His yards were solid. They were good. His targets per route run, very strong actually for a rookie tight end. But like, again, comparing it to Trey McBride's a couple percentage points higher in targets per route run, was a little better in yards per target, and was over 2 yards per route run, where LaPorta was 1.76. Now that's really good for a tight end. And it took McBride until his second year to have this 2+ yards per route run season. So again, that's why I would have LaPorta ahead of him in Dynasty, where I'm like, I think the floor of talent is clearer with LaPorta. Maybe McBride's a little flash in the panty, but this, like when I call McBride the tight end one, I'm thinking of the ceiling outcomes where I'm like, he could really concentrate volume in his offense. It's a lot harder. Like that's easier for me to see with a rookie alongside him. A lot harder for me to see that with LaPorta when you have Amon-Ra there, and you have Gibbs, and you have the potential Jameson Williams breakout. I just the ceiling cases for LaPorta, I think he's a really high floor tight end pick, but the ceiling cases are the ones that trip me up a little bit. And I just was, when I'm talking about his yards per out run being good, I just want to emphasize that it's not great. It was good, but like if the touchdowns come back a little bit, that plays in as well. Like I think he's going to be a long-term really good tight end, but hard for me to see him be the tight end one with this good of a crop of tight ends.
Yeah. I guess the question is, maybe he's a dog to be the tight end one, but should he be favored over the other guys? And that's what you're touching on a little bit with the comparisons to McBride and Kelsey. I'm torn on it. Like I said, early in the offseason, I was concerned about the volume. And then I kind of shifted to like, well, the target share was a little bit better than I had thought. And just a guy that I'm looking up the target share now to just make sure I have it correct. 20.5% target share as a rookie. Pretty strong. And I think if I use that at base with the efficiency in this offense, I do think there's still a pretty good ceiling outcome. I kind of think he could be a small miss, big hit player, but I see where you're saying like you don't think the volume is enough to get to that big hit spot.
I
guess probably take some team stuff too, where they're not as good, defend. They just have to throw more for game script purposes or things, something like that.
I will note he was the tight end one overall last year in half PPR, 192 points. This is with the 10 TDs, but that was low for tight end one most seasons. The year prior, Kelsey was tight end one with 261. He was LaPorta again, didn't hit 200. 2021, Mark Andrews was a tight end one with 243. Kelsey was also over 200. 2020, Kelsey was at 260. Darren Waller was also over 200 at 227. So, I mean, a lot of these seasons we're getting multiple tight ends over 200. In fact, I'm still going back and I'm not seeing a year where we had the tight end one under 200. It was 2017, the last time we had the tight end one in under 200 half PPR points. So like 7 years ago. And that was LaPorta last year. So you do, I think, have to expect him to take a step forward if you think the rest of the elite tight ends. I think tight end one's going to be higher bar to clear this year.
I guess to me, there might be an element of, wow, that was insane as a rookie. Like, it takes some of these young tight ends a while sometimes. Like, what if there's another level that is tough to project, we haven't seen, but what, like what if he hits that? So I've been more in on him at 3-4 turn. I do like defer to receiver a bit more there. Just again, knowing the market, knowing you can get Kittle and Pitts at the 5-6 turn instead of the 3-4 turn is something that, is on my mind as well. But I've gotten my exposure to a little bit above weight on LaPorta when he started out as closer to a pretty big fade for me to begin the drafting season.
I like that point. I know we got to get going. We can't just talk about LaPorta all day, but I do like that point. I've noted before with the rookies. I noted this when we talked about McBride, how I didn't expect Harrison to be like the super target dominant rookie because both Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, who hit really big as rookies, still added a lot of volume in year two. LaPorta could be that as a tight end, right? Like I'm saying, I'm kind of, I think in my head thinking the 120 targets is where he's going to sit, but I think you finally got me to understand what you were saying. We're like, maybe LaPorta goes out and gets 140 targets this year because he's just that good. And that's
and maybe there's something with Detroit. And this gets a little bit more like, hey, you could say this about any outlier situation, but maybe there is something with Detroit too, where like he's able to sustain a very high TD rate, like more than we'd expect.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point though, then you need that because he only scored 190 points with the 10 TDs. So that's sort of the circular nature of this, and it does make it challenging. And I do think, like, I'm a little bit lower on McBride than you, for example, which is going to play into this because you can only draft one in most cases, and you want to make your bets where they're best.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that'll do it for episode 6. Only 2 more episodes on tap for us. The AFC and NFC East divisions coming up. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Again, find all these episodes on the Establish the Edge podcast feed or the Establish the Edge YouTube channel. And make sure you're following bengretch.substack.com and his Stealing Bananas podcast with Sean Siegel. Thanks, everybody.